amazing night. We have been traveling all day, trying to reach Bethlehem, which is the ancestral birthplace of our family in response to Herod's edict for a census. By the time we had arrived, it was past dark, and every inn that we went to was filled. And so we settled down here in the courtyard of the last inn we came to, built a fire, and made our camp for the night. And as I was falling asleep, I looked into the night sky, and I couldn't help but notice how clear it was, and how brightly the stars were shining. Sometime later, I was woken up by a commotion at the gate, which the innkeeper had closed for the night. I have to tell you, he was not terribly pleased to be awakened at this late hour. There was a group of shepherds at the gate, and they were speaking very excitedly. And they spoke of angels that were singing. And they were told that a child would be born that night in Bethlehem who would grow to be God's chosen, our Messiah. Well, I think the innkeeper thought that the shepherds had been drinking. But there was something about the way they told their story that seemed so sincere. And then he remembered that late that evening, a couple had come to the inn. And the woman, scarcely more than a child herself, was heavy with child. And the shepherd said, yes, the angels told us that the chosen one would be born of a young maiden. She must be the one. And so the innkeeper said that he would take them to the stable out back where the couple was, the very last little bit of space available when they had shown up that night. Well, at that point, I was completely awake. And I must say, I was intrigued by what these shepherds had said. And so I decided to follow them and to see, well, whatever there was to see, or not. And as I started to go, I felt a tug at my robe, and I looked down, and it was my grandson, who had evidently been awakened by the commotion as well. And he looked up at me and he said, "Grandfather, where are you going at this late hour?" And I told him that there was a couple in the stable, and that the woman was expecting a child, and I was going to go and see if there was anything that they needed. And he looked up at me and he said, Can I come with you?" And I was just about to tell him to just go back to bed. But the look on his face of excitement and wonder, I couldn't say no. And so I took him by the hand, and we followed the innkeeper and the shepherds out back to the stable. As we arrived in the stable, there was the light of a single lamp. And in that dim light, we could see a man standing and a woman who was seated, and she was holding a baby wrapped in a cloth, sleeping. And the shepherds were talking to the woman and telling her of what they had heard as they were watching their flocks in the hillside that night. That angels had come to them, singing, saying that night a child would be born in Bethlehem, a a child who would be the chosen one of God, our Messiah. Well, I expected the man and the woman to look at one another in disbelief, or to possibly make the same assumption that the innkeeper had originally made, that perhaps these shepherds had been drinking. But instead, they shared a knowing glance with one another. And then the woman looked at one of the shepherds and said, "Would you like to hold him?" And they all shook their heads and said, "Oh, no, we are unworthy, and we have no gift to bring to him, and our hands and our clothing is dirty from being out in the hills with our flocks. No." But she insisted. And so she handed the child to one of the shepherds, who took him in his work-hardened hands and just looked at him for, well, what seemed like a very long time. And I found myself thinking, if this truly is God's chosen, what gift do I have to bring? And then I realized all of a sudden that my grandson was no longer at my side. Where had he gone? And I started to look for him, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement over near the shepherd who was holding the baby. It was my grandson. And what was that he was holding? A drum. It was about that time that the young woman also saw him and looked at him and said, "Well, hello. What is it you have there?" And my grandson said to her, "I wanted to bring a gift to your child, but I didn't have anything. But I found this drum over in the corner of the stable, and I thought maybe I could play my drum for him." No, not a drum. The baby's sleeping. But before I could get to him, he started to play the drum, ever so softly. Pum, 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 pum. I'd never heard a drum played so gently before. And the young woman nodded at him as if to say, yes, keep playing. And then as he was playing ever so softly and quietly, the baby woke up. And it looked like he smiled. A baby that was scarcely hours old. Is that possible? Or was it just the way the shadows and the dim light fell across his face? I don't know. But my grandson continued to play the drum for him for a while longer. And then when he finished, he looked at the woman and said, "I hope your baby enjoyed my gift." And the young woman said, "Oh yes, I'm sure he did. I don't know that I've ever heard a drum played so beautifully before. Thank you." Well, at that point, my grandson and I made our way back to our camp in silence. And as I tucked him into his bed, he looked up at me with his big brown eyes and said, "I played my best for him, my very best." And I patted him on his head, and I said, "I know you did." And before I could rise and turn away, he was fast asleep. Well, this morning, at first light, after building the fire for our morning meal, I thought I would go back out to the stable to check on the couple and their child. Unfortunately, they were already gone. was this small scrap of cloth. Perhaps a part of the cloth that they had used to wrap their child. But there was no other sign of them. No sign that they had ever been there. No sign of anything that we had heard and seen just hours before. I can't help but wonder if that child really is our long-awaited Messiah, God's chosen. And if you had been with us last night, what gift would you have brought him? So that was the sermon that Debbie requested by being the successful high bidder on the first person sermon of the character of your choosing at our Make It, Bake It, Take It auction. So thank you for that inspiration. I can honestly say in 31 and a half years of doing these first person sermons, I've never done this one. This is a character I have never even thought of exploring. So thank you. So now we're going to